Hey everyone! Chapter 1098, right? It's one of those chapters, so I don't really think starting it off with a high energy, like zippity-doo-dah kind of intro segment is really appropriate. This is... I don't even know if it's the only major tragedy in Kuma's backstory that we're going to get. Oda really is like throwing everything but the kitchen sink at him. And in this chapter, he drops the kitchen sink too. That's really, honestly, an interesting way to convey a character's struggle is to start off with all of the struggle, like the aftermath. Because all of this stuff we're finding out about, like, after the fact that Kuma has been turned into a pacifista, after the fact that he's been experimented upon, after the fact that he is a slave to the Tenryubito and being used as a glorified pack mule, essentially. We're finding out now the whole story about him and what led to that. It's intense. If anybody out there says anything along the lines of, like, Oda doesn't really deal with the darker nature of humanity in terms of... Look, Oda is a little bit limited sometimes, considering this is in Weekly Shonen Jump. There's certain things that are very heavily implied in his story that he cannot outright just say that's what it is. Not because of, like, he doesn't want to. I mean, he might, but it's also some stuff with, like, editing and, like, okay, you can't put this in the magazine. That's a little bit more, like, seinen kind of territory, like more of an adult kind of audience. But the implication is there. If you read some of the SBS stuff, and we'll get into what I mean exactly by that, but there's some real dark shit that happens in this manga, all right? Oda might not, you know, focus on that and like just linger on it for an entire chapter and have the characters directly discuss the amount of trauma they have been dealt and what the nature of that trauma might be. But it's there if you can kind of just, like, piece the puzzles together. And it's not a complicated puzzle either. It's like a 10-piece puzzle that anybody could really just, oh, that's what Oda, okay, geez, that's, yeah. So this is one of those chapters. Chapter 1098, The Birth of Bonney. Many people were a little curious on, you know, when Bonney was going to be born because we didn't see her at all in the last chapter. When I reviewed it, I was just like, oh yeah, I'm sure Bonney was probably born somewhere in the gap of time. But after I sat down and thought about it, like, that really doesn't make any sense why Oda would just, like, yeah, we're just gonna skip over this moment. So no, Bonney has not been born yet as of the end of chapter 1097. The cover page is, it's cool. It's Brooke rocking out with an electric eel. You know, that's great. That's cool. Good for Brooke. Actually, there's also a message by Oda here that specifies that the chapter's manuscript is unfinished, and Oda apologizes for that. Now, what that means, the actual dialogue and, like, the script for the chapter is complete, from what I can understand, but the actual, like, art, some of the art is a little bit like sketch art at certain points, or just the line work. You encounter this every now and then. Being a mangaka in Japan is a very labor-intensive job. I think we've all heard the stories of just how little mangakas sleep. I think Oda himself only sleeps like 4 or 5 hours a night or something like that. There's a lot of manga, especially in the last, probably like the last 5 years or so, where I've seen, like, certain chapters that are clearly unfinished just to meet a deadline. It's a serious problem of being overworked. Probably the most notable one is in My Hero Academia during the cultural festival, the chapter where they were having the concert. Like, half of that chapter was just, like, sketch and just, like, very brief, just, like, going through it. I think there was a few chapters of Black Clover like that, too. And that's not anything to do with the mangakas. That's with the very intense, like, deadlines they have to meet. Like, you have to get this done by this point. This is the third chapter in a row we're getting here. I was very surprised last week when I saw that we were, going to get 3 in a row. It's usually like 2 and then a break and then 2 and a break, or sometimes 1 break, something like that. The welfare in terms of like both physicality and also mental health of the mangakas should be paramount here. So even if it's like we're only getting 1 chapter of One Piece a month, if that gives Oda enough time to rest and figure out what he's going to do next, and also just spend time in his personal life, like the dude has a family. I think Tabata, who's the mangaka of Black Clover, I think his wife is severely ill right now, and that's why Black Clover had to get moved to another outlet. It's Jump, what was it called? Jump Giga or something like that. That's going to be moved to. It's like a quarterly magazine, right? So yeah, this is happening here. Honestly, I feel like the sketch work is even more of an impactful thing, for given that a lot of stuff like Kuma's life really is rough to begin with, but now it's really hitting hard, and some of the artwork being more like abstract, like when his life, it kind of like shows that his life is like breaking apart in a way. I'm sure maybe that's not what Oda intended. It was just like, I can't get the manuscript done, we're out of deadline, so I'm just gonna go. But it really kind of adds a whole new like tone to the chapter with that being said, okay? So yeah, cover page, Brooke playing an electric guitar with an eel, awesome. So we're cutting 2 years after the end of the last chapter. So the last chapter ended around 14 years ago. Ginny was 37, and she was the Eastern commander of the Revolutionary Army. The Revolutionaries had been built up at this point to where they had Baltigo. Dragon had his tattoo. It seems like they were the organization that we know of right now in terms of like power and influence. They're heading out to the Four Blues. They have generals in the Four Blues and in the Grand Line. They're liberating as many islands as they can, and the chapter ended with Ginny being captured. Now, we do not immediately, like, oh, who captured Ginny? We gotta bring her back, okay? We're immediately cutting 2 years into the future, so it's now 12 years ago, which is the same year that the Goa Kingdom incident happened. The Grey Terminal being burned by the nobles, Sabo apparently dying and being taken in by Dragon, the backstory with Luffy and Ace. This is all happening in 12 years ago, and Ivankov mentions that almost immediately. We start off the chapter in Baltigo, in the Grand Line. Somebody's messaging them like a distress call, like, oh, things are rough in the South Blue, we need reinforcements, the Toomey uprising is looking bleak. I looked into it. Toomey does not appear, like we do not like know about that island or that kingdom. It's never been mentioned before in the story, but it is in the South Blue. We're going to see it here in a moment. Kuma's going to actually go and help, help the revolutionaries out in terms of like reinforcements and stuff. But Ivankov is there and it's like, oh, we can't. Our hands are full dealing with the Goa Kingdom, the injuries and all the wounded from there. Okay, so this seems to be like right after, and we actually see Sabo as a child like training with Kuma later on in the chapter. So this is like right after the revolutionaries had returned from the east, got back from the Goa Kingdom, and tried to save as many people as they could from the fires of the Grey Terminal. So that's like right after this. Kuma walks over and already Kuma is a little bit more serious. That lightheartedness that he's just kind of like the chipper, cheery kind of fellow, that's kind of gone at this point. He's a lot more serious now, and he's just like, I'll go to the South Blue. I'll deal with it. And Ivankov and everybody are like, Kuma, you've been acting way too reckless lately. Ever since that incident happened with Ginny, you need to be careful. You need to calm down. You're going to do something stupid. You might end up dying. And then Kuma just rockets off to the south. Okay, he's kind of just on a path of self-destruction right now, where he just needs to hit a lot of things, it seems. It's just like Ginny has been kidnapped, and they don't they do know what happened to her. They do know what happened to her. We get to see the rest of that call in a moment of exactly who captured Ginny and where she's located. In fact, they know exactly where she is located, but because they know exactly where she's located, they cannot get her back. All right. So ever since that day, Kuma has just been, getting all of his frustrations and anger out into, he's just pouring it into his job, as it were. In this case, he's going to the Toomey Kingdom in the South Blue. He lands there in the middle of this uprising. The army of the kingdom is like, hold the line! And then the revolutionaries are like, give them hell, boys! And then all of a sudden, Kuma just like freaking Superman, just boom, lands on the kingdom, and the look on his face is like, you know, I am gonna wreck this entire kingdom shit up, alright? Like, this is a Kuma that is all business, and it's just like, paw cannon, Ursus a shock, and he succeeds, from what we're gonna see. The Toomey uprising in the South Blue does succeed, but Kuma really is on a warpath where he has kind of abandon his own self-preservation. He doesn't really care about his own injuries, from what we're going to see in a moment here, and he just pushes forward because that's probably the only outlet he can really have for this, okay? So we get the rest of the call that was made last chapter. So this was 14 years ago. Dragon received a call that Ginny had been captured by a member of the Celestial Dragons. So one of the Tenryobito saw Ginny and wanted her as his wife. Now, we saw this deplorable shit already back at Sabaody. When we first got introduced to the Celestial Dragons, one of the first things that happens is we have Charlos seeing a woman and instantly is like, I want her to be my wife! And then he has his little, like, butler or secretary, whatever, like, yes, sir, I will make arrangements at once. And then Charlos is like, actually, I'm already tired of wives 1 through 6. Toss them back into the lower realm. Yes, sir, it will be done at once. So he goes over to this woman and is like, you're my wife now. And then the lady's fiance is like, hey, that's my fiance. Get the hell back. Like, I don't care who you are, Celestial Dragon, whatever. And then Charlos just shoots him. Kills him right there. Then they proceed to drag off the poor woman to be forcibly married to Charlos. And this isn't just something Charlos does. This is all the Celestial Dragons, or a good chunk of them, do this kind of shit all the time. They have this massive just group of, they're slaves, they're sex slaves. They say, you know, oh, this is, oh, you're being wed to a Celestial Dragon, you're to be married to a Celestial Dragon. No, they are slaves. They are sex slaves for the Tenryubito. That is what they are, okay? So, woman is being taken away, and then whenever they get sick of them, they just toss them back into the lower realm. That is what the Celestial Dragons do. So, you can understand Kuma's anger here, that because she's being taken to Marijwa, to the Holy Land, that is not a place they can just burst into, although, you know for a fact, Kuma wanted to do that. You know for a fact, Kuma was ready to just go on a warpath and charge straight into Marijwa and start busting heads. Alright? It probably had to come down to Dragon or Ivankov holding him down and telling him that, like, listen, I understand. Oh, we definitely understand, Kuma. We want to do that too. But I think it might honestly come back to Dragon's overall plan for this. He's like, Kuma, this is the revolution. We have a plan to make this work. If it was that easy, if it was that simple to just charge in, like, we're not ready for that yet, which, you know, this is rough for Dragon too, but Dragon is a very pragmatic individual, and it's sort of a situation where Dragon has probably seen many of his best friends in the Revolutionary Army get captured, get killed, and maybe even worse. But even despite that, he's got to move forward, because if the overall structure of the Revolutionary Army, if their plan falls, then they're just gonna collapse in on themselves. Like, if Kuma were to just, like, okay, I'm getting Ginny back, and then just charge right back into Marijwa, Kuma would have died, and then they would have been down one of their best, you know, they would have been down not just Ginny, but also Kuma in terms of support for the revolution. Alright? And then the whole army might have collapsed. And Dragon's like, if we want to make this happen, if we want to change the world, if we want to get rid of these bastard Tenryubito once and for all, we have to follow this plan. Alright? Now, Dragon doesn't say any of that in the chapter. That's just me assuming. But I know for a fact Kuma would have wanted to charge straight into the Holy Land regardless. But there was a reason he didn't, and that was probably the reason. Alright? So The Toomey Revolution succeeds. They mention that they have been fighting for 3 years, so this is 12 years ago, so it's 12 years that the revolution succeeds there, so that means they had been fighting for about since 15 years ago. That revolution has been going on. We see reports, all over the world that the revolution, these are the heroes of the people. This is where that reputation begins to kind of form, where all of the oppressed people living in the world of One Piece are now like, oh, there is hope now. And it's not just the hope of just some sun god that may or may not exist. It's tangible now. These are the revolutionaries. These are the heroes of the people that are going to free us, okay? So while that is being shown all over the world, and while the Marines are reporting on it, it's like, it's the revolutions again, sir. It's like, damn them, or whatever. As that's spreading all over the world, we have Kuma, who's heavily beaten up, and he says, Dragon, it's me. I've worn myself out, so I must return by ship instead. Implying that Kuma's pawpaw fruit definitely has limits in terms of stamina, like most devil fruits, most notably Law's. Law's op fruit has, he can't just do, his stuff forever. It drains his stamina if he uses it too much. Same thing with Kuma, where if he exerts himself too much using his pad cannons or his Ursus shocks, he probably can't warp himself as much. We actually saw that with the PX-0 in the present when he was rocketing trying to get to an undisclosed location. He had to cross the red line. He literally had to stop and scale it. Maybe that's because he literally drained all of his energy, getting to the red line. Now, he was a robot at that point, but he was still organic. He wasn't completely made of machinery at that point, okay? It was just his humanity was gone, so it was like his power cell was being drained or something, so maybe that's the reason he couldn't, get over the red line there, or maybe there is a height limit or something with the pawpaw fruit, but in this chapter, it definitely seems to be more of just like a stamina issue, but then again, he was able to send all of the Straw Hats to various locations all over the world at once, but maybe it's different if he's using it himself versus like sending other people away. It's maybe perhaps different. But anyway, he's worn himself out. There's a limit to his pawpaw powers, so he has to return via boat instead, right? So the narrator comes on and says, yes, around 2 years have passed since that incident where Ginny was to be wed in massive air quotations to the Celestial Dragons, okay? Now, we see a boat, a shabby little boat that's all patched up, and it's kind of like approaching an island in the haze in the distance. The sun is blaring down from on top, and we just see a hooded figure in this boat saying, oh, it's okay, Bonney, we're nearly there. And the cloaked figure is saying this. Apparently, there's a baby crying, okay? So this is Ginny heading to a location we're going to see in a moment, and she's cradling a baby Bonney at this point. So Bonney was born 12 years ago. All right, so the theories and stuff, considering Vegapunk was saying like, oh, she's just a child, leave her alone, Saturn. Even Saturn saying, oh, you're just a brat, you're just a child, That is in fact true. Bonney is about 12 years old as of the present of One Piece, using her power, the Toshi Toshi no Mi, to appear older. At the age of, was listed in the Vivre card, like around age 24, okay? And that's the appearance we mostly see her in, and that's the appearance that she had and became one of the super rookies and all that. The only problem I had with that was the issue with Bonney visiting Egghead. I went back and reread that chapter because I'm like, okay, I need to figure out exactly how they phrase that. Because I was thinking it was something like 20 years ago Bonney had been at Egghead. So here's what happened, all right? Vegapunk joined the world government around 22, 23 years ago. It was right before the incident at Ohara. Vegapunk joined in the ranks of the world government, okay? And so since Bonney, when they arrived at Egghead, when she was with Luffy and Chopper and Jinbei and everybody, Bonney says, "Oh, I've been here before when I was a kid, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't all built up like crazy, like all the super advanced science that's on Egghead right now with like the Frontier Dome and everything." So I was thinking like, oh, okay, well, perhaps it was like 20 years ago then when Bonney was there, because that would have been right around the time Vegapunk joined the government. They gave him Egghead Island, but it wouldn't have looked like it did right now. So like right at the beginning of Vegapunk's, factory and his lab, it would have looked very, very differently. But no, that's apparently not the case here. Vegapunk built up his lab pretty damn quickly, I have to say. I assumed he got the lab almost immediately. Then you have to remember Punk Hazard was a thing. So maybe the first island the government gave safe. Vegapunk was Punk Hazard, so that was his first research lab and everything like that. And then after everything went bad with the explosion because of Caesar and everything, which I believe the explosion with Caesar might have been like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. They might have had both islands at the same time. Punk Hazard and Egghead might have been there. But either way, the point is Vegapunk is a super genius and was able to build up Egghead apparently very, very quickly, okay? Because the most that Bonney would have been at Egghead we'll get to it because some situation's going to happen with Bonney here where she's not really allowed to leave the island, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But yeah, so that is confirmed. Bonney is 12 right now, and she's just using her fruit to appear older, right? So, Ginny contacts the Revolutionary Army via Den Mushi from wherever she is in the world, and this is after 2 years of having zero contact with her, no idea what her status is or what's happening to her or anything like that. 2 years go by and they all of a sudden get a call from Ginny, and we have Ivankov, Dragon, some other revolutionaries are there. Kuma is of course there. They're on Baltigo, and it looks like it's like raining outside, like a giant storm is going, and then they receive the call and just like, oh, revolutionaries, come in, and you're just like, oh my god, Ginny, are you okay? It's like, I was finally able to get back down to the surface. I was contracted an illness while I was at Marijois, and they tossed me away. Because that's what the Tenryubito do. As soon as one of their slaves is exhibiting some sort of disease or something, or they just become bored with them, or any reason really particular, they just toss them back down into the lower realm, okay? And so that's the situation that happened with Ginny. And so she says, like, oh, what a stroke of luck. Now, obviously, she has this very chronic illness that's going to result in her death. She's actually on death's door right now when she's making this call. Like, she's currently, like, maybe she's going to die very shortly after this call. All right? So she says, what a stroke of luck, because she at least gets to call Kuma and the revolutionaries and talk to them and tell them how she feels about them and everything, especially Kuma, before she dies. So that's why she views this like a stroke of luck here. Now, of course, Kuma is like, Ginny, tell me where you are right now. Wherever you are in the entire world, I can use my powers and I can warp there. I can get there. Just tell me where you are. And she says, Kumachi, I'm so sorry. I'm at death's door. It's probably a situation where she doesn't want Kuma to see her in the condition that she's in right now. We don't see the whole, like, her whole body or anything like that. But the state that we see her hand, we see her leg, and the condition that her body's in from this illness. So she's like, don't worry about me. You really shouldn't come at a time like this. She begins to say, like, Dragon and Big Bro Ivankov, please take care of Kumachi for me. He has a big heart. Just make sure he's safe. And while she's going on this, like, final goodbye, Kuma just will have none of it. He's like, no, this is not how this ends. This is not how you die. I know where she is. I know the only place in the entire world she would go, and that is back home to the church on the Sorbet Kingdom. I am going there immediately. And so, as Ginny is giving what we will find to be her last goodbye to the revolutionaries, Kuma runs off. Kuma runs off out of Baltigo and warps himself to the Sorbet Kingdom. Now, this is not an instantaneous warp. This is not like the teleportation. This is not like Van Augur. It's still going to take some time, because they're in the Grand Line right now. South Blue borders, the Grand Line, so, it probably won't take days or anything like that, but it's going to probably at least take a day or so, if not a good chunk of that for Kuma to reach Sorbet. And as we're going to see, by the time he gets there, it's going to be too late. But this is a tragic thing that I think, this isn't the worst in the chapter, but it's something that maybe some people would miss. Kuma warps away before Ginny, before he hears her say the next line, is what I'm taking from this chapter. Kuma warps away from Baltigo, and then and Kumachi, I just wanted to let you know, I love you. And I always have, and I always will. The implication is Kuma did not hear that. He left as Ginny was giving this final speech. Maybe he did hear it, and it was like overlaid as he was leaving, But the interpretation I have here is he was gone and warping to sorbet while she says that last line of the message. All right? Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's what I took from it. Cut to an undisclosed amount of time later, could be a day, 2 days, 3 days, whichever. Kuma finally makes it to sorbet. He lands and immediately goes to the church. And there's a gathering of the old folks outside the church that Kuma helped, you know, back in the day when he was a pastor, and Ginny was there and everything. And they say, well, Kuma, you're back. Ginny is here, but I'm afraid that... And then they trail off, and then Kuma bursts into the church, and Ginny is dead. And we see her. We don't see her body. We don't see her full body. We see her lying on the floor with the Denden Mushi receiver in her hand, implying that she died either like during the phone call or like right after she died. So she really was genuinely on death's door, had like 10 minutes left to live, and was just able to call Baltigo. And now Kuma has arrived, sees her body. Her body is colored blue and is covered with thick, scabby, kind of like, I'm likening this condition to grayscale. Oda even calls it something similar. It's called sapphire scale later in the chapter. If anybody's ever seen Game of Thrones, grayscale is a condition. It's taken in reference from leprosy, kind of, from our world, a little bit of leprosy, other bit of like skin cancers and stuff like that. The idea is there's like a piece of hardened chunk of skin that begins when you're infected, and then it spreads over your whole body until your whole body is essentially one giant scab. And in Game of Thrones, at least, it kind of eventually makes you go insane. Doesn't seem to be the case here, but it is a terminal illness that will eventually kill you. So thankfully, at least, it's not quite as bad as Grayscale, where Ginny lost her mind and couldn't even like understand who Kuma was. But it was still a terminal illness to the point where, yeah, she died from it while her whole body was covered in... It's manga, so it's just black and white, but I'm going to assume her whole body is basically like covered in sapphire jewel scabs, you know, that are like blue scabs all over her body, and that's what she died of, essentially a very advanced form of skin cancer, okay? But is also some sort of infectious disease, and also it is a hereditary disease that we're going to see in a moment, because Bonney is also afflicted with this. So, her face, her entire body, when she was exposed to natural light, so she was exposed to the sun, her body turned blue, and these scales, these scabby, like, blue gems, kind of like her skin turned hard as a rock and covered her entire body. She used the last time she had left to travel to the south when she was kicked out of Marijwa. She used the last bit of her energy because she had to travel under the sun in order to get back to Sorbet with Bonney. And so that journey was the thing that ultimately killed her, just to get back home to Sorbet, and then so she could call Kuma and everything. And so Kuma, God, this is tragic. We see scenes of like her arm covered in the scabs. We see her foot as Kuma is just reminiscing about like the first time they met on God Valley, and then growing up together in the church, and then, you know, eating together and just like, you know, hey Kuma, let's get married. And Kuma just, the tears begin to just pour like a waterfall down his face, and he's just clutching her body. She burned up the remaining time exposing herself to the sun to reach here. And then you see a baby. You see baby Bonney that's there crying in the little like crib. And Kuma picks up Bonney and says, "You can rest now, Ginny. I swear I will raise your child well." And also, once again, like this one shot where Kuma is picking up the baby Bonney, and it's in the church, and you can see Kuma's like in the center aisle of the church with the pews on either side, and then the big cross over it, and the altar and everything like that. This one page, it's like more of like pencil sketch art, but it works like really well for this scene. It's super dramatic, as like there's like little pencil sketches, like the light beams like coming through the windows of the church. We see Ginny's grave, and then we see Kuma beginning to raise Bonney he's like learning how to like care for a kid. The old people in town are like, oh, you got to learn how to like feed Bonney with the bottle, and Kuma's like this, like no, not like this, like this, and it's like okay. So Bonnie's. This is what I mean when I mean Oda goes to some dark places in this story. All right. Ginny was taken by the Celestial Dragons and then got pregnant via one of the Celestial Dragons. I can't say the word on YouTube because of monetization reasons, but that was not of Ginny's free will. She did not consent to that, all right? This happens a couple of times in the story, and it's an intense topic, so I understand. If you wanted to skip this part, that's understandable, but there's the scene with Viola and Doflamingo that comes to mind. They were having an exchange of dialogue that implied that there was some type of like, there was some kind of relationship the two had. Somebody asked about that in an SBS to Oda, and he essentially, once again, even in an SBS, he can't straight out say Viola was by Doflamingo. He can't exactly just say that, but he does heavily imply it. It's like, yes, there was like sexual relations between Doflamingo and Viola. Doflamingo forced Viola's father to murder his own citizens, exiled him through Diamante, killed Viola's older sister Scarlet. Her niece Rebecca is forced to fight in the gladiatorial arena. I don't think Viola would have had sex with Doflamingo of her own choice. If it was either, well, to like maybe lull him in a false sense of security, like to just slit his throat maybe. So either direction of that is not good, right? Then there's Boa and her siblings being taken by the Celestial Dragons. Once again, not directly spelled out, but heavily implied. And then here, same deal, where Ginny is kidnapped, forced to marry a Celestial Dragon, essentially be their slave, and then gets sick, gets kicked out, and then shows up with a baby 2 years later. Oda doesn't focus on that point. He doesn't dwell on it. He doesn't spell it out or anything like that. There's no conversation between, like, Dragon, Ivankov, and Kuma discussing, how Bonney was probably born, but you can assume how it went down, all right? So, yeah. Jesus. Whew. Okay, so, there are happy moments coming up in the chapter where Kuma is learning to be a dad, learning how to feed Bonney. One of the older folks is just like, okay, make sure if she's going to be in like a crib next to your bed, to put an iron cage around the crib so Kuma doesn't accidentally like roll over in his sleep and like crush the baby. So we actually see that later. That actually happens. Where Kuma crush where there's an iron cage where it's kind of adorable where he has to sleep with like a protective cage next to Bonney so he doesn't accidentally crush her. There's a scene where Bonney is wearing a nice little dress and all the old folks in town are crying and just like, oh my god, it's like happy times, yes. And meanwhile, while this is going on, Kuma is out there in the world still being a revolutionary. We see a scene where Kuma is feeding Bonney, and she of course has the same appetite that Ginny always had. And then we have a scene where Bonney is left in the care of the old folks in town. They're watching her while Kuma goes off and is just like fighting a war somewhere, okay? And then he comes back, and then he's like, oh, hey, Bonney, how you been? Daddy! And then it's like cut to later. Kuma's in the thick of it. He's got like a giant cannon thing on his back, and he's just like, pull back! Pull back! Those bastards! Boom! 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 It's like, oh, Bonney, happy birthday! Yeah, let's dance! See it? We see a scene with Sabo, Kuma training Sabo at this point, because he's a member of the Revolutionaries at this point. And, it seems like very tragic for Ginny's, how she ended, but, Kuma is a good dad. He's beginning the lessons of being a single father, and it seems like everything is not exactly the happiest, but it's the happiest it could be, And so we have one scene, though, where the two members of Bonney's crew later, the Gyo-Gyo, the guy with the hat, and then the Mohawk dude, one day they show up at the church. All of the windows are boarded up, okay? And so they're like, Kuma, what did you do? Why did you nail the entire, like, church shut? Like, what's going on? It's so dark in here. And then Kuma's like, shut the door, shut the door. And they're like, okay, all right, what happened? And then so Kuma shows Bonney, who's maybe about like 3 or 4 years old at this point. And she's got a blue scale, I should say, showing up under her eye. All right, under her, be her right eye, okay? And so you see that there, and the two dudes, Gyo-Gyo and the Mohawk guy, still don't know his name, are like, oh my god, that's the same condition Ginny had. And Kuma's like, yeah, I don't know what to do. I need to get a doctor. And Gyo-Gyo was like, yeah, we will get a doctor. Don't worry, Kuma, we're getting a doctor right now. And so they run out. They go get a doctor. We have 2 doctors. I guess these are just maybe local doctors in Sorbet Kingdom. One of them is a complete quack and is just like, you say that this blue scale was caused by sunlight? Are you sure? That doesn't make sense. Let's go out in the sun and check. And they're like, no, are you an idiot? Get out of here. The next doctor is a woman, and she doesn't seem to be helpful, but at least she doesn't try to, like, harm Bonney. She's like, well, it doesn't appear to be white lead poisoning, so I don't know what this is. I'm sorry, I can't help you. So that's the situation there. You know, if it was white lead poisoning, she probably would have been like, oh god, it's evil! Get rid of it! You know, it's just like, yeah, because that still pisses me off, by the way, to this day. Law's backstory with that shit, to this day. Like, the idea that Corazon will be like, all right, you have amber lead syndrome. We'll make sure that it's not contagious. There has to be some doctor in the world that knows that. And they're like going to a big hospital and they're like, hey doctor, can you check out this kid? And it's like, you know, he's got this disease. It's called amber lead syndrome. It's like, what? He's got amber lead syndrome and you brought him here? Just get him out of here. It's like, right, yeah, but it's a disease. Aren't you a doctor? No, that's icky. We can't do anything with that. It's like, well, can't you, like, quarantine him somewhere? It's not contagious. No! Burn him down! You know, it's just like, that still pisses me off to this day. So, anyway, Dragon gets involved at this point, though. Kuma, of course, goes to Dragon. Like, Dragon, Bonney, she has the same disease that Ginny had. She has like a scale. I don't know what to do. And then Dragon's like, you know, do not worry. You know, we will use all of our resources. We will pull all of the resources that the Revolutionary Army has at its disposal. We will find you a doctor, Kuma. Kuma says he's quitting the revolutionaries. He's like, I'm done. I'm quitting. I have to be with Bonney right now, okay? You know, and so he's like, I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but I have to stay by her side no matter what. I wasn't there for Ginny at the end. I have to be there for Bonney if something happens. I absolutely have to be there for my daughter. And so Dragon is like, I understand it's important to live without regrets. We'll use our contacts. We'll figure this out. We'll find a doctor. It's like, okay. So we cut a little bit more into the future. We are now 7 years ago. Okay, 7 years from the present. Bonney is 5 years old now and has become kind of like a legend in the town, kind of a la Edward Scissorhands a little bit. There was like, oh, down in that old church there, boarded up away from the sun, lives a vampire child, is Bonney. So some kids from the neighborhood go and try to like sneak in and try to get a look at the vampire, and then Bonney just like bursts out and she's like flipping them off, just like giving them the middle finger, and just like, stay out of my house! And just like, you idiots! Oh, you want to see a vampire? I'll attack you! Ah! You know, so this is Bonney at age 5, you know, she's just like, get away from here! Ah! And I was like, alright. So the kids from the neighborhood are just like, yeah, well, you can't step outside your evil vampire house, can you? And they pull up a cross. One of the kids is like, it's just like, ah, here you go, you vampire! Now you will be burned by the holy visage or whatever. And that's when Bonney like drop kicks the kid, and it's just like, you idiot, I live in a church! Why would you think a cross would work? Get out of here! Alright? And so the kid runs away crying, and Bonney is just like, you know, like in the background, like cackling. So that's when Kuma shows up, though. Kuma like shows up because she kind of like was in the doorway of the church and kind of like, it's like, Bonney, no, get back! It's just like, it's like, even in the doorway, if any sun hits you, it could be a problem. And Bonney is there. It doesn't seem like her condition has really increased at all because Kuma's essentially kept her inside ever since the condition showed itself, all right? So she still has some scales like under her eye, but other than that, it hasn't like stretched to the rest of her like arm or anything like that. So Kuma's just like, you can't go outside. The sun is poison. Well, which this kind of reminds me of that episode of Rick and Morty with Gazorpazorp when Morty has that little alien kid and he's like, you can't go outside, the air is a poison gas that will kill you. And he's like, okay, what? You know, I mean, in Bonnie's case, it is true. If she goes outside and gets hit by the sun, her condition will worsen and she will die. So it is legitimate with Bonney, but still, it's very tragic that she had to live, you know, in a dark church her like entire life. That's not cool. But you know, Kuma doesn't want her to die, and he doesn't know what else. I mean, I guess some doctors have come and gone since then, but none of the doctors even know head nor tails of what this condition even is, how to cure it, or anything. They don't have Sam Tarley, guys. They don't have Samwell to cure the freaking Sapphire Scale. And even then, like even in Game of Thrones, the actual cure for that shit it's brutal. It's basically you have to like flay yourself in order to heal yourself from the condition. Right? But it's pretty bad. Although in Game of Thrones, it was a very severe like when Jorah had it. It was like covering his entire like chest and arm and like neck and everything like that. So in theory, maybe it would be easier to cure it if it's just like that small little part on her eye rather than like her entire body like is covered in it. But anyway, later that evening, Bonney is kind of sitting there and she's upset because the kids were making fun of her face. They were making fun of the stone like scales on her face. And so Kuma tries to cheer her up by saying, oh, do you mean the jewels that you have? The precious jewelry? And he's like, oh, I think they're lovely. And then Bonney is like, oh, you think so? I think so too. I love them. And so that's where the term jewelry comes from, okay? Because I guess her name, because we don't know, well, we know Bartholomew Kuma, but from up until this point, they just called her Bonney. All right, just like they always called Ginny, Ginny. They never knew like the last name of Ginny or something like that. So they just called her Bonney. And so now like Jory might be more of a nickname. It wasn't actually like the name they gave her, because the only reason she has the name now is because she has that condition that was, you know, showing itself, okay? So it's like, oh, you have like those precious sapphire like jewelry on your face, okay? And so Bonney is actually happy about it. She's like, oh yeah, I really like them, okay? You know, it's not my fault I have these, you know, and she's like a little kid, so she doesn't understand. It's just like, hey, I don't understand why those kids were making fun of me. This is just how my face looks. I can't do anything about this. It's not, I didn't choose to have like these blue scales on my face. I don't know why they're making fun of me for it, right? So, Kuma and Bonney are sitting around, they're playing with like giant blocks, and Kuma is asking Bonney, is like, so Bonney, where do you want to go on a trip? Anywhere in the world, you know, where do you want to go on vacation? This is harkening back to Thriller Bark, where before Kuma sent like Perona flying and everybody, he's just like, you know, well, if you could go anywhere in the world on vacation, where would you like to go? So that adds a whole new dark dimension to that, where it started off as like a game that him and his you know, clinically ill daughter would play. So God, he's like, hey Bonney, where would you go on a trip? And Bonney says, oh, I know, let's go to the legendary Sky Islands. And Kuma's like, Sky Islands? Those exist? There's islands up there? So he didn't know, apparently. And Bonney takes out a book. Now, because of my giant tablet, I can zoom in here. The book that Bonney's reading, it looks like the Bible that Kuma's holding all the time when, you know, we first introduced to him, okay? At least it looks like that. Bonney's like, that's right, I read about it in this book. And you see the book, and the cover of the book is IBL. Like, we can only see, like, IBL as the characters on the book, so I'm assuming this is Kuma's Bible. So somewhere, I want to know what this Bible is. Like, I genuinely, like, is it a scripture on Nika? Who wrote the thing? Are there stories in here of other parts of the world? Like, I'm very curious about this Bible now, okay? Well, apparently there's a story about, like, you know, the Sky Islands in there. And, you know, Kuma is like, he's like, oh, well, I didn't even know there were islands up there. That's crazy, really? And then Bonnie's like, yeah, and since it's so high up in the sky, maybe that's where sun god Nika lives. And then that's when Kuma starts doing the dance, like, don-ta-don-ta-don. Oh, yes, we'll get to meet him. That's true. That's gonna tie back. That's gonna tie back. It's just like, Bonnie's like, maybe sun god. It's like, Bonney might as well have just like looked at the camera, like broke the fourth wall there. Yeah, the Sky Islands. Maybe the sun god is up there, right, Dad? Yes, he probably is. Dun, 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 dun. That might as well have been what happened, because we saw Luffy, by the way, during the festival on the night before gold hunting, when they were all dancing around the fire with the wolves. You see Luffy's silhouette, and it's harkening back to the silhouette of Nika. So, there is connections with the sky, of course. And so, hey, I want to see what Eneru's up to. Let's touch base with Eneru. It's been a while, you know what I mean? So, yeah, that's gonna tie back to something. Let's just leave it at that. But anyway, Kuma's like, that sounds like a grand adventure. We can have a big celebration there on your 20th birthday. So where should we go on your 19th birthday? And that's when Bonney says, Fishman Island, and so this is probably a game they played where Kuma would be like, oh, for your 20th birthday, where do you want to go? For your 19th birthday, where do you want to go? And Bonnie's listing off all of these marvelous, amazing places in the world, and with Kuma's Pawpaw Fruit, they can, like free travel. They don't have to pay for, they don't have to get on an airplane like Priceline or Expedia or anything. They could just warp anywhere in the world. And so they're having these stories, and Kuma's trying to keep his daughter's spirits up and everything. Like, someday, no matter what, someday we'll eventually travel the world together, and you'll see all these amazing sights. We'll find a cure, and everything will be great, right? So, not everything will be great. We cut now to a doctor that was probably found by the Revolutionary Army's connections, arriving at the church and saying, like, oh, all right, so I've examined your daughter's condition, and it's a illness that's referred to as sapphire scale. I'm afraid it is incurable. And then Kuma's like, oh my god, you know what it is? Oh, actually, could we maybe have this conversation kind of quiet? Bonnie's inside, I don't want her here. And they begin to whisper, and the doctor is just like, yeah, this disease, this is something I mean, these days, you almost never see this illness. It died out apparently a long time ago. No one gets it, but these stones grow exponentially when bathed in any form of natural light. So even sunlight, not just sunlight, but moonlight as well. And I mean, at the end of the day, moonlight really is just reflected sunlight. That's really what it is. Also adds a new parallel to when Luffy was fighting Kaido on top of Onigashima, and it was night, and so Luffy was like jumping in front of the moon in his Gear 5th, and so it's like, oh, it's the moon, but it is sunlight technically. So there you go, right? But the doctor says, he's like, listen, here's the thing, though. Even if you keep her out of natural light, even if you keep her inside in a dark house all the time, the disease will still kill her. It'll spread no matter what. It's a terminal illness. She's lucky to have 5 years left, and that's if you keep her out of the sun. Obviously, that speeds up if you keep her in the sun. But she's lucky if she'll meet her 10th birthday, at that point, because it's progressing. And so Kuma is like, oh my god. Like, how do you respond to the news that your daughter has 5 years left to live? She's not even going to see her 10th birthday, right? So Kuma is beginning to shake, and he's just like, It's like his whole world. Like, I imagine he's like having a panic attack at this point. Like, his whole world is like spinning around him, right? And so, the doctor leaves. Kuma's like, oh, okay, and he's like going back into the church, and he's like, what am I going to tell her? How am I going to what? And so Bonney bursts in and like grabs Kuma and just like, Dad, I heard the story, I heard the news. And Kuma's like, what? Huh? He's like, I thought you were asleep. And just like, yeah, no, I stayed up and I heard it all. It's just like, so in 5 years it's gonna be over? That's great. Then in 5 years we could travel the world and see everything, like Fishman Island and the sky, and Vacation Island. Did you know that's a thing? Apparently it's a thing. It's an island about vacations. We could go there. And so Kuma is there like, what are you talking about? Like, well, I heard the doctor say in 5 years, everything's gonna be over. So that means in 5 years, I'll be better, right? When I'm 10 and we can travel. And oh God. So Kuma now has to, he's like, yes, Bonney. Yes, it'll be over in 5 years. You just gotta tough it out. You brave little soldier. You just gotta tough it out, and in 5 years, we can travel the world, and yeah, and he's like, yay! I'm like, yeah, okay. All right, Kuma's on a clock now, ladies and gentlemen. Kuma has 5 years to fix this illness. Now, we know he succeeds, because Bonney, going by the timeline, would be 12 right now, and she also doesn't have the scales all over her body. She has that, underneath one of her eyes, she has that, like, I don't know if it's like a piercing or a tattoo or something, but she has like a little mark, like right there under her eye. I always thought it was a piercing, but I'm guessing that might be a scar or some kind of form of the way that it was treated. Maybe Vegapunk, oh, wait. Yeah, Vegapunk's gonna cure her. Okay, yeah, that's going to happen, because then that will tie back into Bonney and Kuma going to Egghead. That will also tie into Vegapunk having that room where he was growing artificial gems. You know, also there's medical research being done there with the organoids and everything like that. So yeah, I think that's going to tie back in. Vegapunk is clearly going to cure Bonney. Maybe that's the result of the treatment, is that mark on her eye, you know, is that little U-shaped thing under her eye, is like what happened. I don't know exactly how to, you know, explain what it is, but that might be the thing that's like left over from her treatment, okay? So, Kuma has to give his daughter some hope. He can't, because she's 5. She doesn't really understand, like death and stuff, especially at that young age. So it's just like the idea of your life being over before you're 10, I can't even fathom that. So Kuma's not going to say that to Bonney. Kuma is going to be like, yeah, in 5 years you'll be cured. And so now Kuma is now more motivated than ever, like, I gotta do it. I said I'm gonna do it. I'm her dad. I'm gonna find Ginny. I'm gonna make sure to find a solution to this problem. I will scour the world. This might also be around the time, because Vegapunk and Dragon were already acquainted when Vegapunk joined the world government, but they were maybe out of sorts for a while because Dragon did not approve of Vegapunk joining the government. But maybe at some point, Dragon's gonna contact Vegapunk and be like, hey Vegapunk, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I have a situation. I have a little girl that has this disease called Sapphire Scale. One of my close friends, Kuma, and she's the daughter of Ginny, another close friend of mine. If you could fix this, that would be great. And so maybe that's when Vegapunk will invite Kuma and Bonney to go to Egghead and then look at her condition, and then that will be, Vegapunk will have the cure, okay? We'll figure out something with science and find the cure, okay? So, before we get to that, though, we have the last shot of the chapter, where a little bit later after this moment where Kuma promises Bonney that she will be cured in 5 years, a familiar nightmare would now soon descend on the Sorbet Kingdom 1 year later. So this is when Bonney is 6. This is 6 years ago. And so then you have a bunch of the townsfolk arriving at the church and being like, Kuma, you have to save us! King Bakori has returned, and he's just as monstrous as ever! It's just like 16 years ago! He won't stop until all of the old people are burned down to the ground! And so that's the end of the chapter. Break next week. Thankfully, Oda, take some time. It might be maybe more than a week. I don't know exactly when the next chapter will be. But yeah, take a break. Okay, so that 3 in a row was kind of pushing it there, it seems. King Bakori has returned. He reminds me a lot of Wapol, kind of doing like a Wapol sort of thing, where Wapol was the ruler of Drum. As soon as the Blackbeard pirates showed up, he got out of there, but then he came back a couple years later to torment the entire island once again. Okay, so King Bakori was ousted by the revolution 16 years ago, but man, that guy must hold a serious grudge, because he's just like, he got out and he got up a force of power, and he's like, I'm going back to the Sorbet Kingdom, and I'm gonna burn that whole place to the ground. That whole lawless area, all those old people, they're gone! You know, like, Bakori was really dedicated, all right? Is he related to William or something? I don't know, but he has a vendetta against this island, okay? So not just against the island specifically, but just against the dead weight of the island, as in the old folks. So it's like, so yeah, King Bakori's coming back. This is probably gonna tie somehow into the whole Kuma was a tyrant thing. Even though, obviously, Kuma's not Bakori, but Bakori was the tyrant, so I think at some point the rumors or legends of Bakori is going to get mixed with Kuma somehow. That's why Jinbei thought that Kuma was this evil tyrant. They just started envisioning Bakori, I mean, they just envisioned Kuma, his face, with Bakori's actions somehow. Not really sure how this all went down. But yeah, Bonney is a daughter of a celestial dragon. So this also explains Akainu. When Akainu was meeting Bonney, she's like, oh, he's like, when you escaped, we all had a little bit of a heart attack, but I'm glad I got you. You know what I mean? Like, after Blackbeard captured Bonney after the events of Marineford, right? So that's the idea. Somebody brought up a really interesting point. So Bonney was a super rookie. She had a bounty of like 140 million at Sabaody, right? But we've actually never seen Bonnie's wanted poster. Not officially, like not officially in the series. So it's very likely Bonnie's wanted poster actually says only alive on it, very much like Sanji's did when the Vinsmokes wanted him. It wouldn't really make, because, you know, see, the thing is, like, you know, obviously it kind of was like, oh, when you left, because you were a member of the Celestial Dragons, technically you were a child of them, right? Okay. Yeah, and I'm not sure, like, because technically speaking, Ginny and this celestial dragon would have been married. I don't like to use that term here because she was a slave, but in the eyes of the celestial dragons, if Ginny and this Tenryubito were married and then they had a child, then that child would be, through and through, a celestial dragon, right? I think it's a different situation if, like, you know, the Tenryubito just, you know, has like a bastard child or whatever, and they could just, oh, you're not really a celestial dragon, just toss you away. But technically speaking, in the eyes of the messed up system of the, and we don't know who the celestial dragon was. I saw some people saying, oh, what if it was Garling? It's like, oh God, if it was Garling. Okay, so Shanks' dad needs to die now. Whoever it is needs to die painfully and a lot. So like kill him and then bring him back and then kill him again would probably be preferable. But we have no idea who the father of Bonney is. I mean, the true father, I mean, you know, Kuma was her dad. Kuma raised her and loved her, and that's, you know, Bonnie's dad is Kuma. Just like how Bellamere was Nami's mother, just like how Zeph was Sanji's father. Okay, just that's how it all goes, of course, in One Piece. But man, this was a tragic one. This was rough. I think, like, it's just reading the chapter itself, just face value, it was sad enough. But if you just stop for like 5 seconds and think about all the implications that go into this, then it's a very dark abyss of intensity. All right, is the best way I can put it. But I'll tell you, it adds a whole new dimension to like the idea that Bonney was rose to the rank of super rookie, had a bounty of over 100 million, and she was only 12. So yeah, she's a really good pirate. And you have Gyogyo and the Mohawk guy that were part of her crew that basically were like, yeah, we're gonna make sure that she's safe because she's Kuma's daughter. We're gonna go out to sea with her, and probably the reason that Bonney went out to sea to begin with was to find her dad. We still don't know the whole situation of how Kuma went to go. Oh. That might have been, okay, Kuma takes Bonney over to Vegapunk's lab. Vegapunk works for the government. Probably out of Vegapunk's hands here, the higher-ups were probably like, okay, tell you what, Vegapunk, you can cure Bonney's illness. In exchange, Kuma, you're going to work for us now. All right, you're going to be a warlord of the sea. And Vegapunk gets to experiment on you with whatever. You have to sign off to being a guinea pig in Vegapunk's experiments in exchange for Bonney's well-being, in exchange for her cure, okay? By the way, can you also understand now why Kuma was so adamant that Bonney not see the memory bubble, and why Vegapunk was also adamant, like, Bonney, listen, I cannot show you the memory bubble, no matter what. Kuma promised me, I cannot show you that. I will die before that. Kind of adds a whole new dimension to it, too. This, oh my god. Bonney would have found, I'm pretty sure Kuma did not tell Bonney about the circumstances of her birth, because she was a child. So that means the way that Bonney found out about her mother and how she was born was just recently in the story when she entered Kuma's bubble. Holy shit. And she's 12 to kind of absorb that information of like, oh, that's what happened with my mom. Like, you could see why she was, like, on the ground, like, bawling her eyes out, and then later, it was like, you know, oh, you were crying all night. It's just like, yeah, this is why. This is why. Oh, man. All right, so, I mean, Law's backstory is really tragic. I'm trying to think of, like, the most tragic backstory out of all of the super rookies right now. Law's is pretty bad. Kids is like, eh. Kids is like, oh, it's tragic. It's tragic. Beiji was just a murderer. We don't know anything about a Rouge. Hawkins, we don't really know anything about Hawkins' backstory. Drake's was probably, yeah, Drake's, we know a little bit about Drake's. Drake's kind of ties into Laws a little bit. Drake's backstory wasn't fun. He was basically used as a beaten servant boy by his dad, so that's not fun either. But yeah, I'm gonna say out of the super rookies that we know of so far, the ones that we know of the backstory, maybe Rouge's is even more messed up, but I'm gonna say Bonney's is the most so far. So yeah, Vegapunk will have the cure for this, but Kuma's probably gonna have to pay the price. All right. So yeah, thanks for watching the review. This was yeah, this one hit like a hammer. Yeah. I don't really know how to end it at this point, so I'm just gonna say bye. Bye.